Great. Well, I just want to welcome everybody to our fourth of six 18-hour city sessions for 2020. Thank you for your participation. If this is your first one you have attended, welcome. If you're an 18-hour city series veteran, then welcome back. This afternoon, we will continue our year-long exploration of the topics facing our region with a look at CMHA's bold transformation with a new strategic plan and a $1 billion investment into the preservation of public housing in Hamilton County. I'm Christine Russell, and I am ULI Cincinnati's chair, and I'm excited to kick off today's program with the support of our Mission Advancement Committee. If you're not a member of ULI, we would strongly hope that you consider joining. You can go to www.uli.org/join for more information. You can also go to ULI Cincinnati's webpage, or you can always contact myself, Lydia Jacobs Horton, or Kim Fantasi for additional information. We would be happy to welcome you to our membership. We're unable to support these types of events and programs without our annual sponsors, and the logos are all featured on the slide here. We really can't thank them enough for their support and for their support in helping us to continue to bring programming to you virtually during this pandemic. We hope you'll consider becoming a sponsor if you're not already. And a special thank you to our 18-hour city series sponsors, Nelson Worldwide and Taft Law. Just a few housekeeping. I want to remind everybody to please keep themselves on mute and keep your video off. We will be doing a Q&A, so as questions occur to you, feel free to type them into the chat. You don't need to wait until the end. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll get as many questions as we can answered at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'd like to introduce Gregory Johnson. He is the Chief Executive Officer for the Cincinnati Metropolitan Housing Authority. Joining in 2012, Mr. Johnson has continued to build upon the agency's legacy of providing quality, affordable housing. Mr. Johnson grew up in public housing himself and served as CEO of Dayton's Public Housing Authority prior to coming to Cincinnati. He's received several community and industry recognition awards from the National Association of Housing and Redevelopment Officials, the Greater Dayton African American Chamber of Commerce, and the Dayton Chamber of Commerce. It's no surprise that Mr. Johnson is very active in our community. He has been appointed to the City of Cincinnati Economic Development and Job Task Force, the Ohio Means Jobs Board, and the Child Poverty Committee. He's also on the newly created Economic Inclusion Diversity Advisory Board at the City of Cincinnati, and he is on the Zoning Appeals Board for the City of Springdale. So with that, I want to turn it over to Gregory Johnson to share their new strategic plan and their update on public housing in the Cincinnati region.
Thank you very much. I wanted to first thank you for the invite. I really appreciate it and getting the opportunity to talk about our region, our community, and some of the things that we're doing to help further along and try to help solve the problem of poverty and housing in our community. Let's see. So as I get started with this, can you hit the next slide? The arrows are not at the bottom. As I get started with this, I want to talk a lot about the history of public housing, because I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very important as we talk about public housing to talk about how it got started, why it was started, because it was more than really just housing. And as we go through our strategic plan and develop our strategic plan and talk about our transformation, I think it's important to kind of bring us all the way back to what is it that the Housing Authority was put here to do other than just providing housing. As you can see, it's partly created through the New Deal, of 1937 Housing Act. But if you look about the stimulating of construction activity, jobs, and then I think clearing of slums, I think some of those comments are going to ring true today of what we're trying to do, not just in Hamilton County, but also across the country, as we're looking at what we built back then on public housing and today what's needed. Next slide. So just to kind of bring us fast forward, I thought it was a great idea to talk about a few of the programs and how HUD has transformed and bringing us all the way up to the process and programs that we're using today to effectively transform the housing authority. So if you look at, I talked about in 1965, HUD became a cabinet. In 1973 was actually the start in the development of what we call the Section 8 program, Housing Choice Voucher. Continuing on forward, the next two programs were programs where HUD and Congress talked about how do we start to make the transformation of conventional public housing to more work opportunity, and then obviously moving to work. And then if we fast forward in 2012, where HUD rolled out their Resident Assistance Demonstration, which is what we were calling RAD. Next slide. So then just the history of CMHA a little bit. 1933, the Housing Authority was formed. Ironically, where the stadium is going today is where the Housing Authority started their first development, which is Laurel Homes. And residents moved in 38, and then in 41, when Woods was constructed and residents moved in. And then talking about as the Housing Authority has grown over the years, today we're the 17th largest public housing authority across the country with our two major programs, which is Housing Choice Voucher, Section 8, and then our asset management program. A lot of people refer to it as public housing, but it really is truly an asset. And so we like to call it an asset management program. Next slide. So then when you talk about how large CMHA is and what role it plays in our community, right now we have over 11,000 vouchers throughout the community. You could see the targeted income families of between 30 and 50%, but you really can move that between 0 and 50% of average median income. We have an $80 million program. When I first started here, we had somewhere in the neighborhood of a $65 million program. So we've been able to grow the program over time, over the last 7 or 8 years. Now we're up to $80 million. A lot of that is because of what's just happened in the last 3 months as well. And a lot of families' rent structures or revenue structures and income structures have changed. But then if you look at the specialty programs, a lot of people don't know, Lighthouse for Youth, Strategies to End Homeless, Silo, LAD, Lydia's House, and additional programs. We actually help behind the scenes to help with some of their operations and help with our HCV program for those individuals and families to find housing as well with that $79 million. That $79 million goes strictly out to the community, and none of those dollars stay with the Housing Authority. We pass that money out on behalf of residents to landlords in a 12-month cycle. Next slide. So then this is just to continue additional partners, Avondale Town, the Y with the senior housing, Episcopal Retirement, Talbot House, National Church, Over the Rhine, Community Housing. All of these are great partners with the Housing Authority and how we use our voucher program to help support additional affordable housing throughout the community. So it's not just what we own, operate, and the vouchers that we give out, but we also help behind the scenes with the operational funding and the long-term or long-lasting of affordable housing throughout our community. Next slide. So then as I continue to move into our public housing portfolio, we're going to talk about, we have a little over 5,300 units that we own and operate that's scattered throughout Hamilton County. Residents pay 30% of their monthly adjusted income. The average age of our portfolio today is about 70 years old. And then the targeted families are anywhere between 0% AMI and 80%. The residents pay about $740,000 a month in rent. So a lot of our residents actually pay rent. And then you can see I wanted to put in there just to give you an idea of what type of units we offer and have scattered throughout Hamilton County as well. Next slide. So then this map, you can't see it very well, but I think you can see the houses and the colors. And it really gives you just a bird's eye view of where some of our operated and owned housing is. And truly, it's scattered throughout Hamilton County, and it's not just in one location. Even though we have some large sites and some locations, we are scattered. And so we're able to give families and individuals a variety of school districts and things that are throughout Hamilton County with our housing. And that is one of the reasons why it's so critical for us to preserve this housing, because it's in communities that offer that for individuals and families as well. Next slide. So then our next portfolio, so now we're getting up to close to 6,000 units, where we own and operate additional properties that we've been able to develop over the last few years that are, it's about 591 families. And then as you can see, the residents pay still 30%. And some of these structures on some of these properties are public housing, asset management, rent control, tax credits between 60 and 80%, project-based vouchering, home rent structures. So it's a variety that helps a variety of mixed income. But all of these income levels are levels that need support for families throughout the community. Next slide. And then this is our latest newly constructed building of 70 units that's in Colerain Township called West Union Square as well. And it goes to that previous portfolio. And this actually has public housing, project-based, rent control. So it's truly mixed, but it's all affordable housing that it's providing in Hamilton County and Colerain Township. Next slide. So now I wanted to kind of transition, give a little history of why the public housing has started, a little bit about what our makeup is, what makes us the 17th largest. And now I want to transition into, before I get into our particular preservation, is housing for the futures. There's been a lot of talk. There's a lot of people that's worked on putting this plan together, a lot of committees on a plan for our community on housing our future. Some of the things that we need to do to make equitable housing and provide better housing for our families and individuals and our seniors and disabled throughout our community. This document was a lot of blood, sweat, tears, but I will have to say I'm very proud to be a part of the process, very proud to be a part of the discussions, and then also very proud of the final product that I think that we were able to put together and produce for our community. And this document is with our hopes is that everyone that's in the affordable housing arena, that's looking at affordable housing, that's looking to fund it, will look at this and use this as a guidebook on how to fund and how we should be formulating policies and procedures to provide the best housing situations for our families in our community. Next slide. So as you can see, creating a more equitable housing market, we have MHA, all labor that uplifts humanity has dignity and importance and should be undertaken with painstaking excellence. I thought that was very, very fitting for what this is, because we're planning in a time of crisis today. Our community, just like across the country, housing was already a crisis, but with the new COVID-19, it is even more important for us to work at this and work as a team and get this right. Next slide. So then you talk about our vision, framing the strategy. The vision for the strategies, everyone in Cincinnati, Hamilton County will have access to quality, affordable housing. We all need affordable housing, no matter how much money you make, where you are on the spectrum. It needs to be affordable for you. And we need to work as a community to make sure we're providing a quality place for all of our families. Next slide. So then we talk about some of our values. And the number one thing that was there is put people first, promote choice. So people have a variety and choose to live where they would like to. Promote and foster diversity. I think today and what's happening in our country and in our community, fostering that diversity, I think is very, very important. Obviously, the equity piece of it, collaboration is definitely needed because not one organization, not one group can do this alone. And then challenge the status quo, challenge the items and the processes that we've done before to get this done. Next slide. So then you look at the combination of rising housing costs, stagnating incomes, and as you can see in our community, this projection came out a few years ago about 40,000 unit deficit, and then the increase in median gross rent. So I just, in the Housing Choice Voucher program, just to give you a balance of this, when I first came here, we were giving families on the average, landlords on behalf of families, about $525 a month. Right now, we're up to over $600 a month in a part of the country that normally never moved. And so you can see the scale has definitely tipped. And then the increase with the housing, the increase with need, and then the stagnation in wages is just creating a perfect storm for our community as we look at some of these problems and issues. Next slide. So then you look at the number of individuals served by the homeless system in 18 is over 12,000. Evictions, 8.7% between 14 and 17. And then the unhealthy part of the housing that's there, which is the risk of lead paint, which is not good for our kids and families in general. We know there's repercussions with lead-based paint and long-term for families and individuals. Next slide. So then you take the state of the housing. Nearly a third of the housing people live in is unaffordable for them. It's cost burden. There's other things that come with this. There's people that want to live in communities that they can't afford to. And by other communities ignoring the fact that we need or they need additional or more affordable housing for families and individuals is creating a strain on a lot of their interior services. So a lot of families spend over 30% because they live one or two families in the same household, or they forego other things that they really need because they would like to live in the community and it doesn't have or offer a lot of affordable housing. And the other part is that's dealing with the cost burden is pay. Our pay with our companies and the jobs that our families and individuals have, they're not keeping pace with the cost of housing in our community. Next slide. And this is one of my favorite slides because I think it really tells a huge picture, gives a huge picture. When you look at $55,000, when we say that's what it really, the medium, and then you look at the levels of the jobs of the retail, the labor, food service, customer service jobs, they're well below the mark of being in that range of the cost of the income median. And then 30% of their income should only go, but we're seeing people between 40 and 60% that's going to housing in our community. So we have a gap with not only housing, we have a maybe an even larger gap with providing a livable wage job. Next slide. And this is one of my favorite slides in the whole PowerPoint. I think in all of the information I'm going to talk about today, if no one remembers anything, and when anyone is talking about developing affordable housing, providing affordable housing in our community, the thing to really think about affordable to who, and you can see there's a large scale. There's people that are between 0 and 30%, and so their income, household median income is at $9,000, and it goes down up to 21, 35, 54, then 113. But as you can see, even at the 100, the 80, and 120 mark, it's still barely, it is below the medium that's really needed for our community based on the studies that we have. So that 9,000 mark is, are we building more housing to help these individuals between 0 and 30%, and how do we do that, and who do we partner with? Next slide. So there's 34 key actions to produce and preserve affordable housing, protect the most vulnerable residents for housing insecurity, altering the system, new resources and financing mechanism that can support these strategies. And there's over 100 detailed recommendations that local jurisdictions, public agencies, nonprofit organizations that all worked with, and then supporting recommendations with the best practice research. Next slide. So we get to the recommendations. Obviously, there's tons and tons of recommendations. There's a lot more detail that goes into this, and that is available. So if you note down at the bottom, it's noted where you can go and get more detail. But if you look at the 35,000 foot level, what are the recommendations? Produce more affordable housing, that's obvious. Preserve existing. Preserving the existing affordable housing is very, very critical. You see this $60,000 mark. We have 60,000, but we need to make sure that they're quality. Preserving and not being quality is not helping individuals move themselves out of poverty, and overall, it's not a help to the community. Protect vulnerable renters and owners, reduce evictions and foreclosures, and then support system changes that create a more equitable housing market. That word equitable, I think, rang throughout our conversations, and I think it's one of the most important pieces throughout all of these recommendations. You can use that word and add that word to the end of each one of these, making sure that it's equitable for everybody that needs to partake in it. Next slide. So then we're talking about preserving and adding new affordable housing. So I went through the history of how public housing got started, talked about it got started to create jobs, to stimulate construction, to clear slums. Then we went through what does CMHA's portfolio look like? How much money does CMHA spend for vouchers? And then we talked about the housing strategy that our communities develop, talked about the need, and what are some of the problems or issues, and then finally, what are some of the recommendations to fill those gaps with needed housing and some of those problems or issues. So then I wanted to come full circle and talk about preserving, which is one of the recommendations throughout the housing strategy document, and then new affordable housing and then using what tools to do so. Next slide. So you talk about public housing capital needs across the country. So in 2010, HUD put something out that talked about public housing across the country. So if you look, $26 billion backlog in capital needs across the country, and that's in 2010, and we're in 2020, at a rate of $3.5 billion annually portfolio-wide need, $2 billion of congressional funding shortage, $1.5 billion annual increase in backlog every year. So you can imagine, and I talked about our portfolio alone in Cincinnati is at an average age of 70 years. And HUD itself is saying, hey, it hasn't been funded. There's something different that has to be done to help preserve and make these units better across the country. Next slide. So then repositioning tools. So these are the tools that HUD has talked about and given public housing authorities across the country to look at, to try to preserve, provide better quality, affordable housing for families and individuals across the country. And as you can see, RAD is one, Section 18 is one, Declaration of Trust, and Declaration of Trust and voluntary conversions are more about conventional loans, and then voluntary conversion is taking a public housing and just making it all project-based. Next slide. And then, so then the sources of capital within a public housing authority, along with the HUD tools. So obviously mixed finance, our capital funds, applying for choice neighborhoods, finance programs, capital fund finance program, energy performance contracts, and then consolidation, consortium, and transfer. A lot of people don't know, actually the housing authorities now have the ability to go across state lines and partner and consolidate if that makes and creates efficiencies, and also do obviously in-state to do so to upgrade and develop affordable housing if it creates efficiencies as well. Next slide. And then as we're talking about repositioning and transformation and preserving public housing, sources of that we will use combined with the HUD tools, 9%, 4% tax credits, CMHA capital fund, historic tax credits, FHA loans, partnering with the City of Cincinnati, CDBG and Home, Hamilton County CDBG and Home, looking at the possibility of bringing different dollars into the community by bond financing. The Housing Authority has the ability to actually float its own bonds, and then conventional loans. All of these resources and other, there's a couple other that I don't have there, but I thought these are the main resources that we're using as we're working through upgrading and developing new housing throughout the community. Next slide. So let's talk about RAD, and let's get to the part about the actual transition of our owned and operated portfolio. I talked a little bit about the Housing Choice Voucher Program at $79 million. We're projecting that program to grow over the next 3 to 5 years, and we may be somewhere between $85 and $90 million a year through that program and providing support. And so as we're converting to RAD and preserving all of these units and keeping them affordable for families throughout the community. Next slide. So I wanted to talk about our first RAD conversion. Our very first RAD conversion is a property that the Housing Authority built back in 2008. The property was built, it needed some refurbishing around 2014, 15. So we did a small RAD and did a conversion. The units here, and we were able to get that done for $1.2 million of rehab with some new flooring and things like that. Next slide. So then our next closing actually happened last July. It's almost a year to the date. We're very excited about it. It's Sutterview. It is a $34 million conversion. As you can see, we took everything down, or are taking everything down to the studs. We're about 60% complete. We're working on our last 30 families to relocate, to start on the last section of the buildings. And our goal is to be done with this entire site in December of this year. And then Evanston is a $3 million project that's in progress with the same time frame of projecting of being done as well. None of these properties where most of the residents have stayed within our portfolios, and most of the residents have chosen to come back to these properties as well. Next slide, please. So as you can see, the portion of Sutterview that's actually complete, and you can see the very first resident that's moving back into their new home. As I said, 114 units taken down to the stud. It's a very, very nice renovation, and the residents that have had the opportunity to move back in are very happy with the product and what they're doing. The key to this, and the interesting part about this $34 million, is that the MBE, the Section 3, that has been created, and we were able to even create where some of the existing residents are in the final phases, and they got jobs with some of the contractors. So they actually get up, go to work down the street, and then they're at home. So the need for them to use any transportation or anything like that. And then the biggest key, obviously, is the wages that they're earning, which I'll talk about a little bit later on in the presentation. Next slide. So our next closing actually just happened a few days ago on June 30th. Pinecrest is a low of $38 million project of 190 units that will be totally renovating. And so we're very excited about, this is our second high rise, but our first high rise with this extensive change, and we're changing entryways and things like that. It's just it's a beautiful building that we're going to be able to enhance and preserve this building for years to come. Next slide. So let's talk about this big transition and development plan and for preservation plan. So what I did here is we put some slides together to talk about how do you and where are you coming up with $1 billion of impact in our community. And all of these, as we've done assessments on our properties and how many units, you saw Pinecrest down there at 190 units. Park Eden actually is our next site that we plan on closing on that next month. And Mariana Terrace, we plan on closing on that property at the end of this year, beginning of next calendar year. And then as you can see on down the line, how many units and what's the estimated redevelopment or rehab cost on these. And we're somewhere around $225 million just on these properties alone. Next slide. And then as we continue to talk, if you remember that map, it was scattered throughout, and this includes single family homes, 4 units. And so the SS means scattered sites, and we just have them numbered as they are on that slide. So if you actually get a copy of the map or the PowerPoint, you'll be able to see where they are. As you can see, this is another $200 million of rehab that we're working on the financial packages to do now as well. And then after somewhere late to after 2021, these will be going to financing and closing, and we'll be starting the rehab on these units as well. Next slide. And then as you look at, we've partnered with developers. We didn't want to take 15 or 10 years to get all of the rehab done. So on some of our larger developments, what we did was we partnered with people that are in the business of providing, preserving affordable housing across the country to help us with this transformation and construction. And the key is to be sure that all of these units are staying affordable in our community and don't have the ability to be transitioned off at the end of a 10 or 15-year period. All of the processes and our MD&As, management agreements that we're structuring, is making sure that CMHA has some control and some say-so if we get a bad actor that's not a good landlord in our community, where we'll have the ability to make some changes to be sure that as we're doing this transition, it acts as the way that we want it to act. So if you look at Liberty Street, which is in the West End, Stanley Row is in the West End, that alone is probably going to be somewhere around $100 million, redevelopment, new construction, the same number of units. If we take some units down, we'll bring the same number back. Finlighter Gardens will be rehab. Winton Terrace will be historic and new construction. And then Millville will be rehab. We have it estimated at about $429 million. We really think it's going to be somewhere around $500 million with inflation. And then by the time that all of that is complete and done. But I will tell you this, I'm very, very excited about the opportunity of rehabbing and upgrading the quality of all of these units. And every resident that currently lives in these units will be have the option of staying in their complexes, which is really a great thing, and not moving people where they don't want to move to. Next slide. And these are just some of the pictures of where some of these units, if you remember earlier on in the presentation, I talked about Winton Terrace. Winton Terrace was built in 1941. So you can imagine the bedroom sizes and things like that need to be adjusted. And there needs to be upgrades done to those units, obviously with Stanley Row, Millville as well, and also Finlater Gardens. If you remember back as well, the HUD study talked about $26 billion in capital. That doesn't mean that the Housing Authority wasn't doing day-to-day maintenance, but there's only so many times you can do day-to-day maintenance. You really, really need a strong capital improvement and a capital replacement program, which when we do the conversion, that's the beauty of all of these sites. And this conversion, it will have a self-contained capital. We won't be waiting on HUD to see how much they're giving out for capital funds. We'll be every month putting away money for the capital improvements at the projected timeframes based on all of the studies. And that will continue to preserve the property for the longevity of what we need in the community. Next slide, please. So then if you look at City West, I think everyone's familiar or should be familiar with City West. It was Laurel, which was one of the first developments in public housing in the country. Now the site is about 20 years old from the first development of rental housing. As you can see, there's 336 units that are there. And what we're looking at now is partnering with a community partner to actually redevelop those units along with the other units. So if you think broader, redeveloping or rehabbing Lincoln and Laurel, which is City West now, also Stanley Row, Liberty Street, you're talking about in less than a 2-3 block radius, we will be rehabbing and partnering and upgrading in the upwards neighborhood of about 800 affordable units right next to a ball stadium that should be able to provide jobs, you know, and everything else that the synergy that's going to bring. And that's a wonderful thing. I really think that's a wonderful thing. And it's a great opportunity that we have to be part of that in our community. Next slide, please. So then if you look at just from a totality standpoint, self-developed in 2019 and 21, after 21, with our co-developer sites, we're about $963 million on the projection, and that is at today's dollar and today's money. And obviously, we didn't factor inflation, so we're pretty confident that all of this will be well over $1 billion. But if you look at our time frames, we're not trying to wait, like I said, 10 years to do this. We're trying to expedite and do this for our community, for our residents, and for the longevity of our affordable housing portfolio. We feel that the operational costs will be less, and it will put the Housing Authority in a better financial stability standpoint, so we can continue to do new development and partner with community partners on other projects as well. Next slide. So then you talk about what are some of the new development and what we've done over the last few years. And so we put this slide together to talk about, and then we left one off, which I'm totally surprised. So the number of new development that we've done is actually 361, because we left a reserve on South Martin off of our slide, which is a project we partner with the county with. But as you can see, there's some city, there's Green Township, Mount Healthy, city again with the Y, Colerain Township, and you can see the dollar amounts that we've used. And then if you add to that 54, another $16 million that the reserve property added to it. So we're well over $65, $70 million of new development. But even with that dollar amount, you can see 361 units is good, but we need 20,000. So it kind of gives you a parameter of what kind of dollars and what kind of partnerships that we need in this community to reach our goal of the 20,000, 40,000 units. It's not just units, it's also livable wages, so then other families can move on, move up, partake, and then allow other families to move into the more affordable units in our community. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to give you an overshot of where some of these new development properties are. As you can see, we're trying to be sure that we're in all the communities, and that word equity, equitable, equity, however you want to say it or use it, that's going to be so important for the Housing Authority to be successful, to do more in community and areas that need it, and then areas that may not have as much, so we can be sure that everyone is getting the equitable opportunity at quality affordable housing in our community, which is all of Hamilton County. Next slide. So then we're talking about preserving affordable housing and creating employment. As we talked about in the beginning, what was this housing New Deal about? Obviously, it was about creating housing, but it's also about creating jobs, creating livable wages. How much money from those wages comes back to the local government, and how much of those dollars go back to the federal government? It all plays an important role, and I think the Housing Authority really, really understands that. And what we're trying to do is make sure that we're strengthening that model and making sure that people can move into those arenas based on what the Housing Authority was created for, and not just focus on property management. Next slide, please. So if you look at, you know, we got Sherman-Williams, it's a home painter training program, how to do business with Cmha. All of these models have been models that we've been focusing on how to help individuals in our community to gain additional financial wealth and growth. How do we take someone that has a small business that's $25,000 a year, grow it to $50,000, $75,000, and $100,000 a year, and make sure that as we are doing this transformation and billion-dollar transformation, making sure that we can put people in a position and offer a position so they can partake in it and they can also give people livable wage jobs. And this includes our residents and resident-owned businesses. Next slide, please. So we're talking about, we've been nationally recognized for our WEB, Minority Owned Business, for our program and how we've been looking at how do we infuse all of these small businesses, small contractors, into what we're doing here every day at CMHA. This is all centered around creating additional jobs, but not just jobs. It's about creating livable wage and job training programs so families and individuals that live in our housing, but also people that live in our community can pull themselves up by their bootstraps and partake in this as well. And this actually helps the whole entire community as we move forward. Next slide. So we continue with economic inclusion. 20% of construction contracts go to Section 3. HUD's goal is 10%. So as you can see, we've doubled our internal goal. 30% of new hires, Section 3. 20% awarded to minority-owned business, and 5% awarded to women-owned contract. If you're not sure what Section 3 means, just a short snap of it is, if we are doing work or providing work through contracting, if someone didn't have a job and they get a job because we're doing it, or if someone was making $10 an hour, now they're making $20 an hour, those are all Section 3. And then if you have a smaller business and then you grow that business because of you gaining a larger contract with us, all of those are Section 3. I'll tell you something as just a sidebar. One of the proudest things, I've been doing this a long time. We just signed recently a $50,000 contract with a resident-owned business. We haven't paid them $50,000 yet, but just the sheer fact that they went from a small business to the potential of making $50,000 in a year's time, I think is amazing as we continue to think through how do we help individuals and families out of poverty in our community. Next slide. So then you look at the economic impact. So CMHA has added $243 million to the community's economic over the last several years, with funds going to landlords, contractors, suppliers, wages, and taxes. 84 million of that went to Section 3 businesses. So these are real dollars that we've made an impact, and those dollars are contributing to companies and businesses, even though some of these dollars are coming in through, we get through HUD grants. It's taxpayers' money, but it's taxpayers' money that's being spent well to create jobs for other taxpayers that help stir and move our local economy. And this is huge. You take that $243 million out of this, of our neighborhoods in Hamilton County, that's a large, and that's a lot of jobs and wages and taxes. Next slide. And then just continuing on with our minority-owned business and women-owned business, as you can see, $92 million, $8 million. 2016 was a great year. That's when we started our West Union project, and we got great participation in that area. And through our, right now, through our projected projects that we've closed on, we're averaging over 40% of MBE, WBE, and Section 3. And as you heard, you're talking $30 million, $38 million. These are huge numbers that is going back into our community. And some of these projects are being financed through 4%, 9% conventional loans. So it's investor money, and not all of it is just federal money that's coming in. And so we're able to grab investor money and then regenerate that back throughout the economy as well. Next slide. Just again, another 714 jobs through our projects. 2016 and 18 were actually great years. 19 is not over yet. I'm pretty sure it's going to surpass 16 as well. Next slide. Then further projections. Next slide. So Section 3 totals. Here's what we're projecting over the next 3 years. As you can see, we're trying to get up to somewhere $90 million of Section 3. So that means that people that didn't have a job to get a job, businesses that were at $10,000 a year, maybe growing to $100,000 a year, and then someone that was making $15, hopefully can get up to $30 an hour through this job creation. Next slide. Here again, we're projecting totals cost on outside developers in City West, and it's the same thing, $126 million that's going to be redistributed throughout this community, all while we're doing something that's needed, which is providing and securing affordable housing, but it's also providing job, skill training, which is needed for people to continue and pull themselves up and out of poverty as well. Next slide. So then you look at MBE and WBE totals projections. Like I said, we're almost around 90 million, and then another 22 million with the WBE. Next slide. And then you're talking about, you know, what goes back into, so $1.12 of indirect induced expenditures is generated as we're doing our business. So if we're doing $1 billion, $1.12% of $1 billion is a lot of money that's going back into local economy, which I think is huge, that we're recognizing that, we understand that, and we're contributing to the overall community with quality affordable housing and then additional job creation. Next slide. And then this is one of my favorite slides. We got a chance to put this together. As you see, I talked about earlier in our housing strategy, providing a livable wage. Through all of this, and as we look at you know, what the livable wage is for 1, 2, 3 children in home, what the poverty wage is, minimum wage. As you can see at the top, by us doing the upcoming development, we're estimating our wage is going to be somewhere around the $31. Obviously, that's a lot of skilled labor involved, but we have to make sure if it's a non-skilled, they still get Davis-Bacon wages. And so normally they would be somewhere around $10 range. And for doing the same job, they're going to be around $17 to $20 a range, which we all know that gets them towards that $50,000, $54,000, $55,000 area for a family where they need. Next slide. And then finally, the impact to the community from our Rad conversions is projected 126 million Section 3 businesses, 87 million minority-owned businesses, 21 million women-owned businesses, sales tax, city earnings tax, Ohio employment tax. All of these are contributions to the community, to people getting skill set, and at the end of the day, it's providing that quality housing that our community needs and the residents that live in our community deserves. And then it builds on that equitable piece, being equitable. I think I can't say that enough in this presentation, because now is the time to make sure that we come through and we do what we need to do and change the hard processes. If I can make 80 to 90% of these projections accurate, we would have done a great job just for the community overall from a financial standpoint, but the other part is from a resident standpoint and living into a quality unit, and that every kid that lives in that unit can think about schooling other than housing. Next slide. I hope it didn't go too fast. I want to thank you so much for allowing me to kind of go through what our transformation is, and then I'll turn it back over to Christian.
Great. Thank you so much. I learned a tremendous amount through this, and I just want to say we had a shout out from Jeff Mills about your West Union Square project. Jeff is the Township Administrator at Coleraine. And I can just say from my personal experience, I live in Mount Healthy, so I see the impact of your developments there, and I worked at the City of Springdale and know what a great asset your developments in Springdale were to the community. So I want to start off with a few questions that I've prepared while we give folks a chance to weigh in on the chat. And I've had some time to read your new strategic plan and really learned a lot about your process and your focus moving forward. One of the challenges you identify in your strategic plan is the public perception of affordable housing and the residents that live there. I think it would be naive for us not to acknowledge the racial and economic discrimination and prejudices that are associated with those perceptions. With the national conversation that's going on now about systemic discrimination and racial biases, I would love your thoughts on that and how maybe CMHA can really take advantage of this opportunity to take a big leap in changing the perception of public housing.
Well, first of all, I'm going to say thank you for that question. And I think as my closing statement on the PowerPoint, now is the time. There is no better time to look at current community policies, processes, how do you award dollars, and how do you view affordable housing in your community and make the hard decisions and to make sure that things are equitable. So I think for the Housing Authority, one of the things that I'm going to put on my mission list, one of 30 probably, is to make sure that I get out there and start to continue to talk to more communities about the variety of affordable housing and the ability of the Housing Authority to help them with some of their needs. I think with everything that's going on in the country and in our community, now is a perfect time because where maybe people were not open to listening before, they're definitely opening to listening to the conversation. I often joke when I do presentations, and I tell people I've been thrown out of every community in Hamilton County, and I keep going back. It's true, but the thing is, when people were open to listening, as Jeff made a comment, you can see what can happen. So I think for the Housing Authority is we have to do two things. We have to communicate, educate, and respond. Communicate means to talk about all the variety. I love that you said you learned so much because not everybody understands what is this thing called the Housing Authority and what is it supposed to be doing. And so one of the things is to educate people about that and then tell to people about how you're doing it and how you're going about doing it and why. And then you have to perform. I think that's one of the things that we have to do. And I think the resident piece is no one can control one individual. And if nothing else that's happened over the last few weeks or months, that's been quite evident. I think what you have to do is present people with equity and make them feel like they're being heard. And I think the rest of that will follow through. So I think educate, perform, is the two top things that we should be doing, and then making sure that we're building long-lasting relationships with the City of Cincinnati, Hamilton County, and other municipalities to leverage those funds to make sure that the housing can get in those communities.
Well, that's a great segue into another question I had about your funding source. because of the pandemic, a lot of communities are having some major revenue hits. And you talked about how, you know, you get money both locally, you get it nationally, and you talked about how you are starting to implement a plan to increase your self-sufficiency, putting money away so that you don't have to rely on HUD as much to start capital projects. But I'd love for you to touch a little bit on your funding, how secure it is, how you plan to implement what is really a bold plan, you know, with the partners and the funding sources that you have.
I think the key word is, and one of the things that you saw in that slide is leveraging. I think the Housing Authority has the ability, if we were to get, I'll give you a small example, West Union. We got a little over $500,000 from the county, and we leveraged that to $16 million. So our ability to leverage funds is a key process that we use and can use to further this development. In the middle of a pandemic, we closed on a $38 million project. Not many people are able to do that. And we did it between 4% leveraging our Rad product that HUD allows us to, and backing it with rent. Our conversion process and the Rad rents and the Rad structure, along with the project-based structure, lenders, it attracts lenders to it because it's secure. So if you say, is your operating funding secure from that you get from HUD? No, I would tell you no. But I will tell you that what HUD is doing, what the federal government is doing, is looking at how can they provide the funding that they're providing in the most effective and efficient way. And they're starting to utilize the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which a lot of the Rad product is centered and based on that. And so 4% tax credit deals are going through, and that investor money is still coming through at a pretty good rate. So between applying for 9%, using 4% deals, and then using the small capital fund dollars that we have and taking that and just leveraging those dollars, is how we feel we're pretty confident that we're going to be able to do this, you know, throughout, you know, the course of getting this rehab done.
Great. We've got a question on the chat. The biggest hurdle recently in developing new affordable housing has been costs. In your pipeline, the average new unit costs about $200,000 a unit. What are some ways that CMHA is looking at to decrease the cost so that you can then build more units?
Well, one of the reasons why our cost is higher, and I talked about it a little bit in my presentation, the Housing Authority was designed, if you look at the New Deal, and the fortunate or unfortunate part, we're still in the 1937 Act, operating under that Act. One of the things under the 1937 Act is Davis-Bacon wages. So as those Davis-Bacon wages go up and down, we have little ability to control the cost of that. But what that does is it doesn't allow, as we're putting these contracts out and as we're developing these units, it doesn't allow people that are working on these jobs to get lower than a livable wage. So the other ways to try to reduce that cost is to look at what type of products that you're using. But the thing that we've learned, I've been in this business over 25 years, you want to make sure you're providing amenities so families can stay in the mainstream. So I don't think that we're going to be able to shrink our costs down just because of the type of organization we are and what we're designed to do. I would love to do that, but then I have to think through what is that going to do to the end wage earner? And are they going to be able to come to work, take care of their family, and do all the things that they need to do as we're trying to spur the economy? It's a great question, and that's why we can't do it alone, but there's a pros and cons with it as well.
So obviously a big part of your mission is that economic impact side of it. It is providing jobs, a lot of times to residents. It's the economic impact to companies in our region who work with you. Your goals for economic inclusion are very aggressive, and your results have been amazing. And I am sure that those come with a lot of time spent with contractors to help you achieve your goals. Could you just talk a little bit about what you do to help your contractors meet your goals and achieve what you're setting out to do?
Yeah, I would have to say I have a really good team that works on this, where we've established and throughout a lot of meetings a process. And I tell you, one of the biggest things that we do is, I mentioned it in the PowerPoint, it's called How to Do Business with CMHA, because some of our forms are confusing, some of them are long. Some of them we think are not needed, but it's something that HUD requires. So what we've done over the last few years is be deliberate about inviting individuals in and having several times a year how to do business with us, even if you have never done business with us. And even if you have, this can help you, help us help you, and speed the process along. And this is where we actually invite developers, invite small businesses in, large businesses in, and actually walk through and train them on how to fill out all the paperwork. What is the time frames on you getting paid? So you understand how to get paid, what sheets to turn in so you can get paid. And what we found by us doing that, and we partner with the city of Cincinnati, they liked our process to do that. And then what we did was we didn't recreate the wheel on how someone signs up for Section 3. We used the city of Cincinnati's process. So if you sign up with the city of Cincinnati, we'll take that. So it helps both organizations as we're putting out bids and contracts. But I will tell you, the biggest thing we've done was outreach, and then train the end user, and then answer those questions. And I will say that people really, really enjoyed that part of it because they never knew how to get work from CMHA. This last quarter, the board approved us to work with 41 different contractors, but they're all small MBE, WBE organizations that they're probably somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 businesses that after this year, they're probably going to grow after unit turns and things like that to somewhere 200, 250,000. And they're hiring other people to do clean out and things like that. So most of it is outreach, and my procurement department has been really good with doing outreach, and the trainings that we do and provide and offer has been a great help. And that's how we've been doing it, and that's how we won our award, how best practice on how to garner and gain Section 3 MBE, WBE.
Fantastic. Shifting gears a little bit, you mentioned a few times the pandemic. There's no way that any of us can avoid thinking about that. Many times through this, we have heard the phrase, housing is healthcare. And I have to say, from a personal standpoint, I'm not sure I ever thought of it like that until we have gone through this pandemic and just been able to see how important it is for everybody to have stable housing, safe housing. And I imagine that your work has changed, probably gotten a little more complicated during this time. But also, again, kind of making some lemonade out of lemons maybe has given an opportunity for conversations that previously may have fallen on deaf ears. So could you talk a little bit about what the pandemic has done for your work, and also how you think we can move forward and carry forward that, that message that housing is healthcare?
Well, first of all, I would definitely say I agree with you 120%. Housing is healthcare. I think they go hand in hand. I think what we've done is we had to look at internal processes and figure out how do we continue to supply the top line services and communication to residents, and based on their capability and then how they're used to talking to us and dealing with us. So it's actually opened some doors for us to be creative on how to do that. And then how do we keep our staff safe? How do we keep residents safe? Because at the end of the day, we're in a people business where we actually have to go in someone's home quite often to make a repair, things like that. So it's caused us to be very creative on how to do that and how to work mobile and still provide the same type of service. But I will tell you this, the other thing it's done is it's created new partnerships for us. Creating the Center for Health Gap has been a great partner of ours. You know, we've had organizations that provided us great information on safety, pandemic. Some things were myth. They came in and provided great information so we can provide our residents, but also providing to us so we can keep our staff safe as well. And so some of those things are, we're going to keep those partnerships. We partner with the church where we go pick up food every Tuesday to deliver food to our sites. That partnership would have never been created. We have a jurisdictional-wide council where we partner with them, where they've been providing food for seniors and other things as well. So I would say if the pandemic has done anything, it's increased our ability to partner. And so when you bring that all back to, well, how does that equate to health? Now people that are getting more healthy food than they probably were not before. You have people that are paying more close attention to cleaning. And so we've changed some of our cleaning processes in our high rises and our vehicles and things like that. All of these are good things that have come out of this pandemic. And then what we're trying to do, and the biggest fear that I have now is keeping the properties healthy, meaning keeping them clean, because as we know, they have to be clean to be healthy. So people can focus on themselves and what they need to do to keep themselves healthy as well. So right now, that's our biggest challenge when you're talking about the health arena. And then, you know, the other thing is we were ahead of the curve and finding out a way to give our families access to testing, where there was a lot of talk about African-American communities that were not being tested. We were early, we worked with the city and a private testing organization where they did some testing on site. And so our residents had the ability to get tested at their walking down to a community room versus trying to get in the car and things like that. So our goal now is, and through this plan and through this transformation, is to, once we go through this rehab, to keep these units healthy, clean, so families can focus on some of the other things that they need to focus on to go to wherever they want to go eventually in life and whatever their ceiling point is.
Great. Well, we wish you a tremendous amount of luck in that work. Extremely important. We had a really good question come through about local transit and public transportation. wondering if CMHA works with local transit authorities to help ensure that public transit prioritizes access to low-income residents, especially with SORTA's plans for transit improvements.
The answer is yes. So we have a couple of areas where we feel that today, we feel that there needs to be additional access. And I know prior to the new CEO coming on, I had a lot of conversations and we're trying to work out different ideas with the previous CEO. And now the new CEO, conversations are happening because there are areas what I'm going to consider to be dead spots, or there's not enough frequency. And there's not enough frequency because of the way jobs and employers need workers. So it's not conducive for families and individuals to use public transportation to get to and from those particular job start and finish times. So there's more work that needs to be done, but we are having those conversations and trying to figure out how do we supply that public transportation in those particular areas. And those areas right now are Winton Terrace area, Finlater Gardens, Millville. There needs to be more frequency in those areas so those individuals can get to second, third shift Kroger jobs at their warehouse in Springdale, so they can get to across the river to some of the Amazon jobs as well. So those conversations are happening, and I've even reached out across the bridge to that transit system to see how all three of us can work together for that.
Fantastic. Well, I'm going to close with one other question. So ULI, at our heart, we're a real estate organization. You talked about the shortage of units in our region, and I'd love to hear about your goals in terms of expanding your portfolio, how you go about determining what areas to do that, and whether it is purchasing existing buildings, purchasing land, and constructing new. Just love to hear a little bit about your thoughts and your plans for that.
So we really are ramping up now in our development department. That's a great question. I'm glad you asked, because I failed to cover that in my slides. But we're ramping up in our development department. As we have, you can see we got our rehab plan together, and now it's really to look at expansion. So really what we do now, or how we put this together, there's what we call a process that we're go through before when we go out to look for tracts of land and then existing buildings. And really right now, where we're looking at tracts of lands, we want it to be close to jobs. And what kind of jobs are those? Retail jobs, manufacturing jobs, and public transportation is high on our priority list. And then depending on the type of housing, hospital and schools. So we have a idea of if we're going to do, because we want to embark on a couple of new things coming up as we develop housing. We want to build more handicap accessible housing. So we're going to build more of those. We're going to build workforce housing. We're going to do one at Bennett Point, but we want to do more workforce housing. And then we want to get into designing housing product that's for first-time college families. So that would be an adult or a child that's in the family that they're going to college for the first time. So we want to partner and build around those areas, because those are jobs as well that people can have working at the university while maybe going to school at the university as well. So when we look at that, and then we want to build our first, in the next 3 years, our first assisted housing. And so we're looking for areas to do that. So the other thing is we like to provide a variety. It's less expensive to do multiple units at one place, but we like to grab houses that are in outlying communities that give access for families to all of those things I talked about. So we kind of look in that pecking order, and that's actually what we're doing now. And we also are thinking about and looking at the city of Cincinnati is going through receivership. And so we actually take a look at some of those properties where they're looking for a receiver and see if we can make a difference, improve that property, and then bring that under our portfolio as well.
Well, thanks for sharing a little bit about your plans for future development. Thank you so much for taking your time today to share your bold new plan. We really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody that joined us today. I just want to remind everybody that our next 18-hour city series will be on September 10th. We obviously don't know yet whether that will be in person or virtually, so just watch your email for that. And the topic is going to be zoning codes that reduce barriers to community vision. So thank you everybody for attending. Thank you, Mr. Johnson, and everybody please continue to be safe and healthy. And if there's anything we can do to help you, don't hesitate to reach out.
Thank you so much for allowing me. I really appreciate it.
Everybody have a good evening.